Air travel is widely recognized as the safest way to travel, but occasionally, unexpected challenges put aviation safety to the test. Mechanical failures, severe weather, and unforeseen mid-air incidents can create critical situations in the air. Yet, amidst these daunting scenarios, skilled pilots have transformed potential disasters into incredible stories of survival. Through quick thinking and precise maneuvers, they've managed to land their aircraft under the most challenging conditions, saving countless lives. Join us as we explore the 20 greatest emergency landings ever caught on camera. Number 20. LOT Polish Airlines, Flight 16. On November 1st, 2011, LOT Polish Airlines Flight 16, a Boeing 767-300ER, was making its way from Newark, New Jersey to Warsaw, Poland. It was supposed to be a routine transatlantic flight, but what happened next was anything but routine. As the plane approached Warsaw, the crew attempted to lower the landing gear, but to their shock, the landing gear wouldn't extend. The pilots tried multiple backup systems, but none worked. With no other options, Captain Tadeusz Rona prepared for a belly landing, a dangerous maneuver that few pilots ever have to perform. The Boeing 767 circled above the airport for over an hour.
In the first part of Lester Holt's report here tonight, the landing gear on a 767 wide-body flying,
burning off excess fuel and giving emergency crews time to prepare on the ground. Finally, it was time. Captain Rona skillfully guided the aircraft toward the runway at Warsaw Chopin Airport. With nerves of steel, he executed a flawless belly landing, bringing the aircraft to a stop without the use of landing gear. The impact was smooth enough that all 231 passengers and crew members on board survived without serious injury. After the landing, the passengers were swiftly evacuated, and the airport was shut down for 2 days while the incident was investigated.
And the pilot of a Polish Airlines jet is being hailed as a hero this morning after he was forced to make a belly landing.
The Boeing 767, however, was heavily damaged and was later deemed a total loss, marking it as the 14th hull loss of a Boeing 767. Number 19. Gimli Glider. It started as an ordinary flight from Montreal to Edmonton on July 23, 1983. Air Canada Flight 143, a Boeing 767, was cruising at 41,000 feet when a startling realization hit the cockpit. The plane was running out of fuel, completely. Due to a series of miscalculations involving metric and imperial units, the aircraft had been loaded with less than half the fuel needed for the journey. Captain Robert Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal suddenly found themselves piloting a 132-ton glider, with both engines dead and the electrical system offline. The pilots, relying on their gliding skills and the manual backup instruments, were left with one daunting task: finding a place to land. First Officer Quintal, recalling his time in the Royal Canadian Air Force, suggested the decommissioned airstrip at Gimli, Manitoba. But there was a catch. The airstrip had been converted into a racing track and was filled with families, campers, and even go-karts at the time. As the aircraft descended, Captain Pearson executed a masterful dead-stick landing. The nose of the plane slammed into the runway, and the aircraft skidded to a halt just meters away from spectators, who watched in disbelief as the massive jet came to rest. Incredibly, all 69 people on board survived.
And the pilots managed to glide the plane safely and landed here on this strip in Gimli, Manitoba.
Number 18. The Miracle on the Hudson. Imagine a routine flight turns into a heart-stopping drama in the skies over New York City. On January 15, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport, destined for Charlotte. But just 3 minutes into the flight, disaster struck. A flock of geese collided with the Airbus A320, causing both engines to fail. With no power and no time to reach an airport, Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger made a decision that would make history. Calmly, he informed air traffic control, "We're going to be in the Hudson," and that's exactly what he did.
And my body responded immediately in a very normal, human way.
With unparalleled skill, Sully glided the plane over the George Washington Bridge and executed a flawless water landing on the icy Hudson River. The plane touched down like a feather on water, avoiding a catastrophe in the middle of one of the world's busiest cities.
The pilot did a masterful job of landing the plane in the river.
all 155 passengers and crew were safely evacuated, many standing on the wings in freezing water before being rescued by ferries and emergency crews.
We are very grateful that everyone is off the airplane safely, and that was really what my husband asked to convey to everyone.
This heroic landing was caught on camera from multiple angles, turning Captain Sully into a national hero overnight. The incident was so remarkable that it was later adapted into the movie Sully, starring Tom Hanks. Number 17. Qantas Flight 72. Imagine soaring at 37,000 feet over the Indian Ocean when suddenly your plane takes a nosedive without warning. This is not fiction. It's the terrifying reality that passengers on Qantas Flight 72 faced on October 7, 2008. The Airbus A330, on its journey from Singapore to Perth, was cruising smoothly until an onboard computer glitch caused a series of violent, uncommanded pitchdowns. The chaos began when the aircraft's Air Data Inertial Reference Unit malfunctioned, sending faulty data to the flight control systems. Within moments, the plane pitched down at an alarming 8.4 degrees, throwing passengers and crew against the cabin ceiling. Captain Kevin Sullivan, a seasoned pilot with a background in the U.S. Navy, fought to regain control, but the plane continued to defy him. Even with full back pressure on the stick, the aircraft only responded after a 2-second delay, a lifetime in such a critical situation.
You died 6 or 7 times on the operating table.
I'm lucky to be here alive.
As if that wasn't enough, just 3 minutes later, the aircraft pitched down again, this time at 3.5 degrees. Panic set in as overhead bins burst open and passengers were injured by flying debris. Realizing the severity of the situation, the captain declared a mayday and diverted the plane to the nearest airstrip, Learmonth Airport in remote Western Australia. Despite the intense situation, Captain Sullivan managed to land the plane safely. Out of the 315 people on board, 12 sustained serious injuries, while 107 suffered minor ones.
All I could see was the floor disappearing, like away from my feet. We were going up.
The aftermath in the cabin looked like a battlefield, with blood and debris scattered everywhere. The heroic actions of the crew and the subsequent investigation led to significant changes in Airbus's software to prevent such an event from ever happening again. Number 16. Cathay Pacific Flight 780. The skies over Hong Kong were calm on April 13, 2010, but for the passengers of Cathay Pacific Flight 780, it was a day that would be etched in their memories forever. Imagine cruising at 39,000 feet, high above the South China Sea, when suddenly, both engines of your plane begin to fail. This wasn't just a nightmare scenario, it was happening in real life. The Airbus A330, carrying 322 people, was on its way from Surabaya, Indonesia, to Hong Kong. About 20 minutes before landing, disaster struck. The engines began malfunctioning due to contaminated fuel, which had caused critical components to seize up. The pilots, Captain Malcolm Waters and First Officer David Hayhoe, were faced with a terrifying reality. The engines were stuck at nearly idle power, and they had very little control over the thrust. As the plane approached Hong Kong, it became clear that they couldn't maintain a safe speed. With both engines failing to respond, Captain Waters declared a mayday. They were now effectively flying a 200-ton glider, and a crash seemed inevitable. In an extraordinary display of skill and composure, Captain Waters manually guided the crippled aircraft towards the runway. The approach was fast, too fast, but there was no other option. The plane touched down at a speed of 230 knots, far beyond the safe landing speed, and came to a screeching halt. The tires burst, and smoke billowed from the landing gear, but the aircraft stayed intact. The aftermath was chaotic. 57 passengers were injured during the emergency evacuation, with 10 needing hospitalization. Investigations later revealed that the engines had been choked by spherical polymer particles in the fuel.
After a Cathay Pacific Airways flight aborted takeoff, and passengers were instructed to do an emergency evacuation.
Number 15. British Airways Flight 5390. It was supposed to be a routine flight from Birmingham to Malaga, but on June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 became the scene of one of the most incredible survivals in aviation history. At 17,300 feet, just after the plane reached cruising altitude, the cockpit windshield blew out due to improperly installed bolts during maintenance the night before. Captain Tim Lancaster was violently sucked out of his seat, with only his legs remaining inside the cockpit. First Officer Alistair Acheson, with remarkable composure, took control of the aircraft. As the cabin depressurized and alarms blared, the flight attendants, particularly Nigel Ogden, clung to Lancaster's legs, preventing him from being fully ejected from the plane. With Captain Lancaster hanging halfway out of the aircraft, exposed to freezing temperatures and hurricane-force winds, Acheson executed an emergency descent, heading for Southampton Airport. Despite the intense situation, he successfully landed the aircraft, saving all 87 passengers and crew on board. Miraculously, Captain Lancaster survived the ordeal, although with severe injuries. Number 14. Qantas Flight 32. An early morning departure from Singapore to Sydney turned into a high-stakes drama on November 4, 2010. Qantas Flight 32, an Airbus A380, was cruising at 7,000 feet when disaster struck. The aircraft, with 469 souls on board, experienced a catastrophic engine failure. Engine number 2, one of its 4 massive Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines, exploded with a loud bang, sending shrapnel slicing through the aircraft's wing and fuselage. Captain Richard de Crespigny, leading a crew that included 2 Czech captains and a first officer, was immediately faced with a situation that pushed both the aircraft and the crew to their limits. The damage to the plane was extensive. Critical systems were destroyed, and fuel was leaking from the left wing. The crew received over 100 aircraft monitor warnings. This made it one of the most complex emergencies ever encountered on an Airbus A380. Despite the chaos, Captain de Crespigny and his team remained composed, methodically working through the failures. They decided to return to Singapore for an emergency landing. As they approached Changi Airport, the situation was still perilous. The aircraft had lost several braking systems and could only rely on partial reverse thrust from 2 engines. The landing was tense, but Captain de Crespigny managed to bring the damaged aircraft down safely, coming to a stop just 150 meters from the end of the runway. The investigation revealed that a faulty oil pipe in the engine caused an internal fire, leading to the explosion. The incident prompted a global inspection of Trent 900 engines and brought about changes in maintenance practices. This near disaster is often hailed as a textbook example of exceptional airmanship and crisis management, with all 469 passengers and crew surviving without injury. Number 13. Asiana Airlines Flight 214. On July 6, 2013, Asiana Airlines Flight 214 was on final approach to San Francisco International Airport. The Boeing 777-200ER, carrying 307 people, was moments away from touchdown when things went terribly wrong. Captain Lee Kang-kook, with only 43 hours of experience on this aircraft, was at the controls. As the plane approached the runway, it became dangerously slow and low, a situation the crew failed to correct in time. At the last second, the tail of the aircraft struck the seawall, tearing it off and sending the plane spinning out of control. The Boeing 777 skidded across the runway in a cloud of debris and smoke before coming to a stop. Inside the cabin, chaos erupted as passengers scrambled to escape. Despite the horrific crash, the majority of passengers survived, though 3 young women tragically lost their lives and 187 others were injured. The investigation revealed that the crew's over-reliance on automation and lack of manual flying skills contributed to the accident. Number 12. Air France Flight 358. On August 2, 2005, Air France Flight 358 was on its final approach to Toronto Pearson International Airport. The Airbus A340-300, carrying 309 people, was battling severe thunderstorms, heavy rain, and strong winds. As the aircraft touched down on runway 24L, it became clear that this landing would not be routine. The plane touched down too far along the runway, and with the weather conditions worsening, the crew couldn't stop the aircraft in time. The jet skidded off the end of the runway at a speed of 92 miles per hour and crashed into a Etobicoke Creek just beyond the airport boundary. What followed was a heart-pounding scene as the aircraft burst into flames. The crew immediately initiated an emergency evacuation. Despite the chaos, every single person on board survived, though 12 were seriously injured. The quick actions of the flight attendants, who ensured that all passengers evacuated within 90 seconds, were crucial to this miraculous outcome. Emergency teams arrived within seconds, containing the situation and preventing a potential disaster. The crash caused major disruptions, with hundreds of flights canceled or diverted. In addition, Significant traffic chaos erupted in Toronto as onlookers caused accidents while trying to view the wreckage. Number 11. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. On January 5, 2024, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, a Boeing 737 MAX 9, departed from Portland, Oregon, headed for Ontario, California. Just 6 minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed to 16,000 feet, a loud boom echoed through the cabin. The left mid-exit door plug, a sealed section where an optional exit door could be, blew out, causing rapid decompression. Passengers near the site of the blowout were hit with a blast of wind and noise. A teenage boy seated in row 25 had his shirt ripped off, and his mother had to hold on to him to prevent him from being sucked out of the plane. Oxygen masks deployed as the pilots quickly descended to 10,000 feet, a safer altitude where the air pressure is sufficient for breathing. Inside the cockpit, the decompression event caused chaos. The cockpit door flew open, slamming into the lavatory door, while the first officer's headset was ripped off. Despite the mayhem, the crew acted swiftly, turning the plane back toward Portland. At 5:27 p.m., the plane made a successful emergency landing back at Portland International Airport. All 177 people on board survived, though 7 passengers and 1 flight attendant sustained minor injuries. The incident led to the grounding of Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 fleet for inspections, as well as a broader investigation by the NTSB. Number 10. Red Air Flight 203. On June 21, 2022, Red Air Flight 203, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, was on a routine flight from Santo Domingo to Miami. But as the aircraft approached Miami International Airport, what started as a smooth landing quickly spiraled into chaos. As the plane touched down on runway 9, the pilots noticed a vibration coming from the left side. Moments later, the left main landing gear collapsed. The aircraft veered off the runway, skidding across the grass, and collided with a concrete structure. This impact caused the right main gear and nose wheel to collapse, rupturing the fuel tanks and sparking a fire. Inside the plane, 130 passengers and 10 crew members faced a terrifying scene. Smoke filled the cabin as the fire grew. Despite the panic, the crew initiated an emergency evacuation. Passengers scrambled to escape, with 4 sustaining minor injuries. The Miami-Dade fire rescue team quickly extinguished the fire, preventing what could have been a far worse disaster. This dramatic event left 2 runways at Miami International closed for days. The National Transportation Safety Board later determined that the left main landing gear failed due to inadequate dampening during landing. Number 9. Flying Tiger 923. On a dark September night in 1962, Flying Tiger Flight 923 was crossing the Atlantic, bound for Frankfurt, Germany, from Gander, Canada. The Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, piloted by Captain John Murray, carried 76 people, most of whom were military personnel. Suddenly, in the middle of the Atlantic, all 4 of the plane's engines failed. One by one, they burst into flames. The aircraft was still 1,000 miles from the nearest land. Captain Murray, facing an impossible situation, issued a desperate mayday call as the plane descended toward the pitch-black, stormy ocean below. As the plane plummeted, the 4 flight attendants, knowing they were facing a water landing in one of the most unforgiving environments, prepared the passengers for impact. They gathered sharp objects, instructed the terrified passengers on how to brace for the crash, and put on life vests. At over 120 miles per hour, the aircraft hit the 20-foot waves. Despite the catastrophic circumstances, Captain Murray achieved the impossible. He managed to ditch the plane in the turbulent sea without it breaking apart. But the ordeal was far from over. In freezing waters with help hours away, survival was uncertain. Miraculously, 48 of the 76 on board survived, clinging to life rafts until rescuers arrived. Number 8. U.S. Bangla Flight 211. On March 12, 2018, U.S. Bangla Flight 211 approached Tribhuvan International Airport in Kathmandu, Nepal. The Bombardier Q-400 carried 71 people from Dhaka, Bangladesh. What began as a routine landing soon descended into a nightmare. Captain Abid Sultan, an experienced pilot, struggled with stress and poor communication with air traffic control. As the plane neared the runway, confusion in the cockpit led to a series of erratic maneuvers. The aircraft veered off its intended path, and despite the captain's attempts to regain control, the Q-400 was misaligned with the runway. At the critical moment, the plane landed halfway down the runway at an angle. It skidded off the tarmac, crashing through the airport's perimeter fence, and slid down a slope before bursting into flames. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but the damage was already done. Of the 71 on board, 51 people lost their lives, including the captain. 20 others survived, many with severe injuries. Number 7. United Airlines Flight 232. Without warning, the peace of a mid-July afternoon in 1989 was shattered. United Airlines Flight 232, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, was cruising at 37,000 feet when disaster struck. The tail-mounted engine exploded, sending shrapnel tearing through the plane's hydraulic systems, instantly rendering them useless. With no hydraulics, the pilots lost almost all control over the aircraft.
Roger, sir. That's a closed runway. That'll work, sir. We're getting the equipment off the runway, and they'll line up for that one.
What should have been a normal flight from Denver to Chicago became a desperate fight for survival. Captain Al Haynes, with over 30,000 hours of flight experience, found himself in a scenario that was considered impossible. Alongside him were First Officer William Records and Flight Engineer Dudley Dvorak, who worked tirelessly to stabilize the uncontrollable aircraft. Their only tool left was the throttle control of the remaining 2 engines. Through sheer skill, they managed to keep the plane flying, but it was far from stable. The aircraft was oscillating, losing altitude, and the odds of a safe landing were grim. As Sioux Gateway Airport came into view, Captain Haynes and his crew prepared for a crash landing. They aimed for runway 22, but the plane came in too fast and too low. The right wing dipped, striking the ground first. The plane cartwheeled down the runway, breaking apart and erupting into flames.
I grabbed my son and we started running. And I had no idea where we are.
Despite the severity of the crash, out of the 296 people on board, 184 survived. Number 6. British Airways, Flight 9. On June 24, 1982, British Airways Flight 9, a Boeing 747, was cruising at 37,000 feet over Indonesia when something truly terrifying happened. All 4 engines suddenly failed. The aircraft, en route from London to Auckland, had unknowingly flown into a cloud of volcanic ash from Mount Galunggung. The ash was invisible to radar, making the situation even more dire. Captain Eric Moody and his crew were left with a powerless jumbo jet, plunging towards the Earth. As oxygen masks dropped and the cabin filled with panic, the crew struggled to keep control. They attempted to restart the engines, but nothing worked. Moody calmly informed the passengers, "We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We are doing our damnedest to get them going again." As the aircraft descended to 12,000 feet, Engine 4 miraculously restarted, followed by Engines 3, 1, and 2. With the engines running, the crew was able to stabilize the aircraft and make an emergency landing in Jakarta, Indonesia. The landing was far from smooth, with the windscreen severely damaged by the ash, forcing the crew to rely almost entirely on instruments. Before we move on, here's today's subscriber's pick. Today, we delve into a gripping moment from aviation history that unfolded on the tarmac of Naha Airport in Okinawa. This photograph captures the intense aftermath of China Airlines Flight 120, a Boeing 737-800. This was right after it had made an emergency landing on a warm August day in 2007. What began as a routine flight from Taipei soon escalated into a life-threatening crisis. Upon touchdown, the aircraft taxied to the gate, but the situation took a drastic turn when the right engine caught fire. This was due to a fuel leak triggered by a loose bolt in the slat track assembly. Panic ensued as flames quickly engulfed the wing and threatened the fuselage. Remarkably, the crew's immediate response and efficient evacuation protocols came into full force. Within minutes, emergency slides were deployed, and all 157 passengers, along with 8 crew members, escaped unharmed before the fire intensified. Firefighting teams rushed to the scene, combating the blaze with foam and water, preventing a potential disaster. What are your thoughts on this unforgettable incident? Let us know in the comments section below. Number 5. Azores Glider. A transatlantic journey from Toronto to Lisbon turned into a harrowing tale of survival on August 24, 2001. Air Transat Flight 236, an Airbus A330, was cruising at 39,000 feet over the Atlantic when the unthinkable happened. A fuel leak caused by improper maintenance led to the complete loss of engine power mid-flight, leaving the plane to glide over 75 miles without power. Captain Robert Pichet, An experienced pilot and First Officer Dirk de Jager were left with a daunting task, guiding a powerless aircraft to safety. With no engines and dwindling altitude, they set their sights on Layas Air Base in the Azores. The situation grew more desperate as they descended, losing critical systems like hydraulics and cabin pressurization. As the plane approached the airbase, the crew executed a series of maneuvers to reduce altitude, including a full 360-degree turn. Finally, at 6:45 UTC, the aircraft touched down hard on the runway. Despite the high speed and lack of normal braking systems, Captain Pichet brought the plane to a stop, saving all 360 people on board. 14 passengers and 2 crew members sustained minor injuries during the evacuation, but everyone survived. Number 4. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. April 17, 2018, started like any other day for the 149 passengers and crew aboard Southwest Airlines, Flight 1380. The Boeing 737-700 took off from New York's LaGuardia Airport, bound for Dallas. But as the plane climbed to 32,000 feet, disaster struck. The left engine exploded, sending shrapnel flying, shattering a window, and causing the cabin to depressurize rapidly. Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, a former Navy fighter pilot, took control of the situation with remarkable calm. Passengers scrambled to help as Jennifer Reardon, a passenger seated by the shattered window, was partially sucked out of the plane. Despite the best efforts of those around her, Reardon tragically lost her life. Amid the chaos, Captain Schultz communicated with air traffic control, quickly diverting the flight to Philadelphia. The damaged plane descended rapidly, and the crew prepared for an emergency landing. As the aircraft touched down, passengers braced for impact, but Captain Schultz executed the landing with precision, saving 148 lives. The aftermath revealed that a fan blade in the engine had fractured due to metal fatigue, leading to the catastrophic failure. Number 3. TACA Flight 110. On May 24, 1988, TACA Flight 110 was en route from Belize to New Orleans. The brand new Boeing 737-300, piloted by Captain Carlos Dardano, encountered a severe thunderstorm during its descent. The storm was more intense than expected, with rain and hail so heavy that both of the aircraft's engines failed due to water ingestion. The engines flamed out, leaving the plane without power as it descended through the stormy skies. Captain Dardano and his crew tried desperately to restart the engines, but they couldn't get them to respond beyond idle power. With no time to reach an airport, the crew faced a grim choice: attempt an emergency landing in an unprepared area, or risk a crash landing in the water. Spotting a narrow grass strip near NASA's Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, the crew prepared for a landing unlike any other. Captain Dardano executed a perfect dead-stick landing on the grass strip, bringing the powerless aircraft down smoothly despite the odds. Remarkably, all 45 passengers and crew survived without serious injury. After the incident, the aircraft was repaired and eventually returned to service. Number 2. Qantas Flight 30. A routine flight from Hong Kong to Melbourne turned into a nightmare at 29,000 feet when a loud explosion shattered the calm. It was July 25, 2008, and Qantas Flight 30, a Boeing 747-438 carrying 369 people, suddenly experienced a catastrophic failure. An oxygen cylinder in the forward cargo hold had exploded, tearing a gaping hole in the fuselage just forward of the starboard wing. As the cabin rapidly depressurized, oxygen masks dropped, but not all of them worked properly. Some passengers were forced to share masks, while others panicked as debris filled the cabin. Captain John Bartels and his crew acted quickly, executing an emergency descent to 10,000 feet to ensure everyone could breathe. Despite the chaos, Captain Bartels managed to stabilize the aircraft. The crew made the critical decision to divert to Manila, Philippines, where they landed the damaged jet safely at Ninoy Aquino International Airport. Miraculously, there were no injuries among the passengers and crew, though the psychological impact was profound. The investigation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau revealed that the explosion was caused by a ruptured oxygen cylinder. Number 1. Ural Airlines Flight 178. A calm morning in August turned into a dramatic test of aviation skill and bravery. Ural Airlines. Flight 178 had just taken off from Moscow's Zhukovsky International Airport on August 15, 2019, bound for Simferopol, Crimea, when disaster struck. As the Airbus A321 ascended through 750 feet, the aircraft collided with a flock of seagulls, causing both engines to fail almost simultaneously. With no time to return to the runway and the plane losing altitude rapidly, Captain Damir Yusupov and First Officer Gorgi Mirzin were faced with an unimaginable challenge. The crew had to find a safe place to land, and they did just that by expertly guiding the powerless aircraft into a cornfield approximately 3 miles from the airport. Despite the severe damage to the plane, all 233 people on board survived. The aftermath was nothing short of miraculous. Only 10 passengers sustained minor injuries, and the quick, calm actions of the pilots were lauded internationally. The event was compared to the Miracle on the Hudson, and both Yusupov and Mirzin were awarded the prestigious title of Heroes of the Russian Federation for their exceptional airmanship. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.